The Micro Four Thirds lens system came of age some time ago with the introduction of the fixed aperture f2.8 zoom lenses in wide, standard and telephoto guises. Olympus and Panasonic haven't rested on their laurels though. They've continued to add lenses in an admirably intelligent way, lenses that offer genuine alternatives to already existing ones, or that follow a different philosophy. The beauty of it is that when you look at the additions to the Panasonic and Olympus ranges, there is surprisingly little overlap. Olympus add bigger, heavier, high quality and speedier versions of the basic primes. Panasonic add 2.8 to 4 zooms, offering compact size with usefully wide zoom ranges. Olympus do a 300mm f4, Panasonic do a 200mm f2.8. What all these lenses have in common is that they cost a lot. We can complain about that, but it was never part of the Micro Four Thirds manifesto that it would be a low-cost system. Nevertheless, the fact that Canon's 200mm f2.8 prime, while not directly comparable, is a third of the Panasonic's price is food for thought. The 200-2.8 just oozes quality. That lovely hunk of glass on the front, the chunky solid build and the smooth silent operation are just what you'd expect at this price. The focusing ring is wide and sensitive, though as you'd expect with today's Micro Four Thirds cameras and their instant focus acquisition, there's little need for it. The focus limiting switch is useful with a long lens that focuses as closely as this one. Racking from infinity down to the 4 feet minimum distance is a lot of physical movement, and potentially a time waster in low contrast conditions where the lens might hunt around to find initial focus. There are also autofocus manual and stabilization on-off switches, and a handy function button which is programmable but will mainly be left on its default stop focus setting, ideal for sports and action photographers. While many Olympus lenses have an on-lens button, this is a first for Panasonic. Below the button is a memory switch, which will recall a preset focus point. Set the switch to memory and focus where you want. Press the memory button. Set the button to call. Now just go back to normal focusing. To recall the preset, just press the button. You can do a similar thing with the manual focus clutch on some Olympus lenses. Very handy. The lens incorporates a physical aperture ring at the front of the lens with the red dot positioned for normal aperture control via the camera front or rear dials. I confess to never moving the ring off the red dot. An aperture ring was a standard feature of pre-digital age lenses, but it's a relatively new addition to digital ones. I can't work out whether I'm a Luddite if I don't use the ring, or a Luddite if I do. There's also an accessory tripod mount for the lens tripod screw mount for occasions when the fatness of the lens obstructs the tripod plate. Mounting via the camera tripod screw would be risky given the weight of the 200mm f2.8. As with Olympus's mounts, a trick is missed by not giving the foot an Arca Swiss dovetail fitting, necessitating an adapter and a clumsier than necessary experience. Last but not least, there is 1.4 times teleconverter. It's not unlike the Olympus one in design, but neither one fits the other's lenses. Performance-wise, all I have is a litany of superlatives. It gives contrasty, clean and razor-sharp images edge to edge from wide open downwards, with a tiny improvement stopped down to f4. I used it at maximum aperture virtually all of the time. The heavy blur of the out-of-focus backgrounds, even at a distance, is part of the reason to buy this lens. The converter does take the edge off sharpness and contrast, but you'd need to look hard to see it. Certainly it wouldn't be worth having the Olympus 300mm f4 as well. The stabilisation is perfectly good even on an unstabilised body. Given my shaky hands, I'd want to use about a 750th of a second to handhold this. But with the lens stabilisation only, I could use 125th reliably. On the G9 with dual stabilisation, I could get down to a 30th with a decent success rate, but I'd still use 125th for certainty. Distortion is non-existent, as is purple fringing. The minimum focusing distance is a very useful 115 centimeters, or less than 4 feet. The converter doesn't change that, of course, so provides an even bigger close-up image. Focusing is lightning fast in single AF as always, while continuous autofocus is as good as in any Micro Four Thirds. Shooting at 2.8 with CAF, you need to be careful where your focus point is placed. It's quite possible to get an out-of-focus face on a moving shot, not because the focus is off, but because the focus area is on the subject's chest, and the depth of field just doesn't extend to the face. All in all, this Panasonic Leica performs to the very highest standards. There's no getting away from it. no matter the performance or build or anything else. The first thing any Micro Four Thirds photographer is going to notice about this lens is the price. It's laid off a bit by the inclusion of the 1.4 times converter, which sells for nearly £500. But it's a shame that you can't choose to buy it or not, as you can with the Olympus converter. That would bring the off-the-shelf price down to more competitive levels. It's hard to justify the Panasonic converter's £150 price premium over the essentially identical Olympus item. Price aside, there's nothing not to like with this lens. It's a joy to use, and if you have the money, there are a few better ways to spend it. No one is going to improve on this 200mm lens, so as a once-only buy, the price looks less daunting, if no more affordable. If you want a similar job done with a Nikon DSLR, you're looking at a lens costing over £12,000, 3 times the weight and twice the length. That lens doesn't come with a converter, though Nikon informed me that it does come with a donkey and a complimentary bale of hay. A 200mm f2.8 for Micro Four Thirds has a more reasonable weight and size, but they shouldn't hide the fact that this is a specialist lens. 8 times magnification, a 5.2 degree angle of view, is not a spec you can use every day. It is great for distant action and birds, but will actually be too long for some sports. For me, the main use for a lens like this is its pictorial drawing, the shallow depth of field, coupled with the perspective compression. A simple shot of folks walking towards the camera is somehow glamorized. However, I confess that when using it pictorially, I several times found myself reaching for the zoom ring and wishing I had my 50-200 rather than this lens. The great versatility of the zoom more than outweighs the advantages of the extra stop of speed under day-to-day conditions, because 200mm is often too long, or with the subject moving towards you quickly becomes so. Pulling back on the zoom often allows you the breathing space for a second bite at the cherry. I would also emphasise that a 150mm lens at f2.8 is much easier and faster to use than a 200mm. I think that 150mm is probably the longest focal length in Micro Four Thirds that can still be described as everyday useful. The fact that Olympus's 150mm f2.8 is a zoom makes it even more so. Used for what it is good for though, the 200mm does a job that nothing else can. For birders working in dim light, winter or floodlit sports it is the best. For motorsports, equestrian meets, ski competition, so many areas, it puts Micro Four Thirds photographers on an equal footing with DSLR users. I confess I was really looking forward to getting hold of this lens, and it hasn't disappointed me in any way. A stunning lens. It is big, and it is clever. Thank you for watching.